past couple of weeks, we have seen a radical shift when it comes to coverage of Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. Because a couple of months ago, the mindset was that, like, yeah, this was a minor release. This wasn't going to do anything. This wasn't a big deal. Nintendo's going to have to reveal the real game soon so that Nintendo Switch can salvage itself from going bankrupt and going out of business and failing. There was this mindset, this very serious push to promote this idea that this was a minor release that wouldn't impress anybody, that kids wouldn't want to play it, that adults wouldn't want to play it, that nobody would want to play this because it was such a low quality, low effort slop game. And all of the initial reviews and impressions tried to push that idea. Everyone tried to say this was a lazy, casual 2D platformer where you couldn't possibly die and that it had no challenge to it whatsoever. The more they did this, though, the more people started looking into it and realizing that a lot of the criticisms that people had about this game don't make a whole lot of sense. For example, this is a game that was developed by Goodfield, the developer behind Woolly World and Crafted World, two of the most critically acclaimed, successful Yoshi games ever. Okay, Goodfield was brought back for their third time on the Yoshi IP after a huge success with Crafted World, the third best-selling Yoshi game ever. And there wasn't really a single person that thought this would mean anything or would amount to much or would turn out to be such a big deal, because both Woolly World and Crafted World were, at the time, written off and ignored by the masses. People didn't want to acknowledge how good Crafted World was when it came out, because that was seen as a lazy, low-effort 2D platformer. Kind of just a lazy rehash of Woolly World instead of its own unique game with its own unique features. Mysterious Book seems to be such a radical departure from the Crafted World formula that there is no coping about this anymore. You can't write this off as a rehash. You can't write this off as a lazy sequel. You can't write this off as a Yoshi's Island clone. You can't say that this is worse than Yoshi's Island, because when you just look at what the game is actually doing, when you look at your objectives and you look at what happens in the game, like, what you get is this wholly cohesive, interesting experience. Goodfield has expanded upon what makes their games interesting, notably like the collectibles and unlockables, and have made them a cohesive focus of the experience. In short, rather than being a 2D platforming action platformer like Yoshi's Island or Woolly World or Crafted World, like, this is its own thing where it's more similar to Super Mario 64, in which you're thrown into a world, you have objectives to accomplish, and you have to accomplish them. Like, the focus isn't on the difficulty or the challenge or anything. It's basically about exploring and interacting with the world, utilizing your unique mechanics. Just like how Super Mario 64 wasn't nearly as difficult as Super Mario Bros. 3, Mysterious Book is not trying to be as difficult as Yoshi's Island. Quite the contrary. This is a Goodfield game in which it focuses on high-quality gameplay that is not really rooted in traditional challenge. And the common assertion among gamers is this idea that, like, oh yeah, challenge is a good thing, casualizing games is bad, making games easy is bad, I want games to be hardcore. And one of the things that's becoming very apparent to me, as someone who plays more games than anybody listening to this video, that's not necessarily true. Like, difficulty doesn't necessarily make a game better. For me, what I'm looking for when I'm playing a game is like a unique experience that you can't really find anywhere else. And from looking at Mysterious Book, it seems as if it's absolutely fulfilling that need, that it absolutely has its unique aesthetics, it has its unique mechanics, it has its unique objectives. Like, it plays completely unlike every other Yoshi game that exists, and that is something that we should be celebrating. But it's not. Like, with a lot of other Nintendo franchises, we're constantly stuck between this desire for something new, interesting, and exciting, between what is old and kind of proven. Like, we kind of saw this with Star Fox Remake, actually, in which a lot of people were really excited about getting a new Star Fox game, wanted a new Star Fox game, wanted something fresh, original, and exciting, and then we just got another remake of 64. Now, the remake of 64 was very well received because 64 is honestly one of the best games ever made. But conversely, because that remake exists, because we didn't get a new Star Fox game, we were essentially robbed of that new Star Fox game because the natural reaction for normies was to clap like seals whenever they see something they recognize. And that becomes a problem whenever Nintendo does something new or interesting, is that the automatic response to something like this is to reject it by saying that it isn't as good as what came before. So for Mysterious Book, the instant cope that came about because this game was announced was this idea that, like, well, it's not as good as Yoshi's Island. Ignoring the fact that game's 30 years old, that everyone's played it already, that, like, even if you love Yoshi's Island, like I do, it's my favorite game of all time, that even if you're like me, you would want something new, fresh, original, and exciting. Like, the immediate cope for a lot of people is to just bring old games into it. The immediate cope is to insist that the older game was better with no regard for what this new game is trying to do or what it's trying to accomplish. Because we were told this a lot, going into this, that this was a game for babies and that Yoshi's Island wasn't like that. and I can tell you, as someone who was in my 30s when Yoshi's Island first came out, okay, Yoshi's Island was hated when it was first shown off. It was kind of like how people reacted to Wind Waker when that was first shown off. Okay, at the time, Donkey Kong Country was big, Killer Instinct was big, Mortal Kombat was big. Like a lot of like super realistic, like digitized, like actors were like that was a huge thing. Like 3D visuals were becoming a thing, and then Nintendo comes out with this weird crayon drawing thing. Like Yoshi's Island was initially received with a lot of skepticism, and like people were clowning on it for a long time. It wasn't until way later that game developed like the following it did, until people like played it extensively and realized just how much more technically competent it was than Donkey Kong Country, which as much as I love DKC, it really was very, very, very visual focused. It was very much its appeal primarily lay in the graphics. The actual gameplay was kind of simplistic. Like Yoshi's Island was better than Donkey Kong Country, but that wasn't evident simply by looking at it. And I think that's the problem that we keep seeing with a lot of these Goodfield games, is that they intentionally go out of their way to be as child friendly and as like have the paper book, scrapbook kind of aesthetic as possible, when in actuality they are extremely competent games. They are far beyond the quality of something like Yoshi's Story. And yet, like, the common mindset among casual players, people who haven't played stories in 30 years, that like they have to be around the same level of quality, right? Story was seen as like a step down from Island back in the day, so surely the same must be true for like Woolly World, Crafted World, and Mysterious Book, even though that's not actually the case. It's a completely different team. They have more content. They have a better design philosophy. Like the actual end product of the Goodfield era of Yoshi games has been absolute killer, to the point where like I honestly think going forward that Goodfield is going to be Nintendo's good go-to company for the Yoshi franchise going forward, because they keep innovating on this series in really unique, interesting ways. The problem with all the critics is that they don't play these games, they don't pay attention to developers, they don't understand how the series has grown and evolved over the past 30 years, and as a result of that, their immediate response whenever they see anything Yoshi related is just to say that it's never going to be as good as Yoshi's Island, without really processing like how much the series has grown and evolved since then. Like, I love Yoshi's Island, but there's no denying, considering its age and considering how much I've played that game to death, that like it really has no appeal to me anymore. So in essence, like the endless comparisons to older games in the franchise aren't really capable of downplaying what this game is trying to accomplish. I see people negatively compare this game to Yoshi's Island, and it's just something that like I honestly don't even really want to hear anymore. At this point, Goodfield has won me over as like the best Yoshi team to ever exist. And their involvement in this game should have like been this huge revelation, this huge deal that got people on board with this game, got people fired up, got people excited about it. And yet, because of like just how modern gaming journalism works, like a lot of them aren't even aware that Goodfield has been one of Nintendo's best partners for the past decade. That they put out Crafted World, they put out Woolly World, they did Princess Peach Showtime, they even did like Bakaru, which was a completely new 3D platformer IP. Like they're doing all this cool stuff, and yet we're still in this phase where like normies aren't even aware that they're a company. You know, like they're not aware that all these Yoshi games that are all radically different in style, presentation, mechanics, that they're all coming out of the same team, and they're also coming out relatively quickly. Princess Peach Showtime came out in 2024. You know, the only reason I thought that this game might not be developed by Goodfield was because it felt like kind of a quick turnaround time. But here we are with another Nintendo exclusive game 2 years after the excellent Princess Peach Showtime. You know, 7 years after Crafted World. You know, 7 years since Crafted World. So you can't even try and tell me that like it's too soon for a new Yoshi game from the same developer because it's been 7 years. This period of Switch 2 has been kind of interesting because we've been getting a ton of sequels to games on Switch 1 that I think a lot of people like didn't really expect to see again. You know, stuff like Mario Tennis, stuff like this, stuff like Splatoon Raiders seems more in line with Octopass expansion than anything in Splatoon 3. Like we're seeing like a lot of these like sequels to beloved Switch 1 games that I think a lot of these game journos and like the industry at large has just kind of written off and ignored. Like that's just kind of my mentality looking at this game at this stage, looking at the criticisms of it, is that like the people who are critical of this game, they seem to radically misrepresent what the game actually is. You know, I'm seeing them complain about the aesthetic, I'm seeing them complain about the mechanics, I'm seeing them complain about the difficulty, and it's like I feel as if none of this is anything that like anyone in the actual audience is going to care about at all. And I do think this is like the reoccurring problem when it comes to like the reviews of these games is that actual Yoshi fans want stuff like this. Actual Yoshi fans like the aesthetic, they like the mechanics, they like the vibe, they like good feel, they like the collectibles, they like the personality, and yet like reviewers just seem completely incapable of like coming to terms with that. To them, this is a 2D game and it has to be destroyed. And from where I'm standing, like the more I see from this game, the more interesting it actually looks. It looks like a very in-depth, interesting 2D adventure game, and it's something that I'm very interested in, like experiencing for myself later tonight. But at this stage, like I just don't understand why so many people are so adamant that this game is going to turn out to be a complete disaster.